Hello, everybody. Hello. Before we get started, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. Obviously, this is a very timely discussion, and putting together something like this in a relative hurry means asking people to set aside some of their priorities to help. So I'd like to thank Pat Barnum, Pat, Juliet, Heather Johnson, Heather, Bob Ogden, and Cynthia Sharp. I'd like to say thank Nick, of course, and the panel for coming all this way. And a special thanks to Colleen Rowley. Colleen Rowley actually started this whole thing, put it together, got the ball running, and we just kind of picked it up and took it from there. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Nick. He's our MC, and please welcome Mr. Nick Ludwig.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think I need a mic. If I need one, you let me know, right? Okay, thanks everybody. You know, it's a sign of a very successful event when more people attend than actually RSVP. I think you should give yourselves a hand. Unfortunately, for those of you that thought by not RSVPing that you wouldn't get on some sort of a list, I apologize for that. You're going to be on the list. Most of you, of course, are already on the list. Okay, really quickly, let me tell you the genesis. Take 30 seconds to talk about the genesis of this, because really, Colleen Rowley, 2 weeks ago, we learned that William Binney was going to be in Chicago. Yep. And Colleen said, do you think you could get a group if he made a side trip up to Minneapolis or Minnesota? And of course, we said, I think we could. And so that was the start of it. And so we hustled and put it together really quickly, and I'm very pleased about this. We also thought that this panel discussion idea would be a great idea. That let's get some discussion going, both from some of our local people asking questions of Mr. Binney and back and forth, as well as questions from you. You'll see on your chairs, right, there should be a place where you can write and ask questions. If you have a question, write it down and then pass it to Heather Johnson. Heather, she's waving. If we have time, we don't know if we'll get to all the questions, but we're going to try. Okay, so if you have a question, you might hear already somebody else ask the same question. So if you got a similar question, it might get asked anyway. But so I want to also thank real quickly. Again, Colleen Rowley and standupfortruth.org. Ross, where's Ross?
He's at the bar.
He's at the bar.
There he is, right there.
There he is.
I was at the bar.
Yeah, right. Ross. Colleen's husband, Ross. The Libertarian Party of Minnesota Congressional District 5 affiliate, the Blue Republicans, Juliet, I think you already mentioned Libertarian Party of Minnesota, Agorafest 2015. What could that be? If you want to find out more about that, go to the back. The Minnesota Tea Party Alliance, and we also want to thank Bent Creek because I think they were a little bit nervous about this event, and we just want to tell them to look at it. It's okay. We're not going to be talking about politics here. We're just talking about creepers, peeping toms, people like that. We're trying to figure out whether it's a good thing for America or not. That's all. That's what this event's about. Okay, let's get into this panel. We've got, besides Mr. Binney, we also have our moderator is Tony Stiles. And Tony is from Nebraska, but now you've come up and are you now a Minnesotan?
I have no idea what does it take to be Minnesota.
You're there. You're in.
Right. The passive aggressiveness. I guess.
Right. It takes about 40 years to really get Minnesota. Todd Pierce. Todd and I go a long ways back. I think Todd is one of the most people with the most integrity that I've ever seen, and seriously, and the work that he's done for the Guantanamo prisoners is incredible. And I know he's going to have a lot of probably pointed things to say tonight, which is great. And then we have Christopher Berg, who's going to represent the hackers, the cryptologists, those kind of people. And I think this will be a great panel. So without further ado, is there anything else we need to talk about? So the bar's down there, the bathrooms are also in that direction. After we're done, we're going to have pizza and more drinking. Tony, take it away.
All right. Hey everybody, I'm Tony Stiles. I'm a radio show host with GCN, nationally syndicated on around 100 stations around the country. And I am here to ask some questions evidently. And I'm going to get right to it. In the words of Bruce Jenner, let's cut the small stuff. All right. You're welcome. There we go. First question we have here. I've written down my own questions. I also have some questions here that were asked from some friends of mine that are here in the room, and also some friends of mine that are around nationally about what we're doing here today. The first question that we had is, how can we push for the FISA course to be eliminated entirely from the process?
Well, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
That's a good question.
Oh, you want me to answer? Okay.
I'm going to
What's your drink there? This is kind of, see, it's, I need a little more slack. Okay, there we go. The first thing I would do is indict them. And the reason I would do that is very simple. They violated the Constitution by issuing general warrants. Okay. How about now? Is now all right? Can you hear me all right?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? All right. Is it all right? Okay, all right. Well, I mean, like I say, the first thing I would do is indict them because they were violating the Constitution. They also know as lawyers and judges that you're not supposed to issue a general warrant. I mean, each warrant is supposed to state the name of the person, the probable cause, what you're going for, where you're going for it, and it's supposed to list everybody. So instead of issuing one warrant to Verizon saying turn over 110 million U.S. citizens' data, well, they should list the names of all of their subscribers and the probable cause why they're after them. I mean, they're after them for law enforcement. That's really what they're after for. And they don't say that, they don't admit that. They were doing all this in secret because they knew it was illegal. Second Circuit said it was illegal. Right, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals just ruled about a week and a half ago that this was illegal. I mean, I knew that from the very beginning. In October of 2001, that's when this started. And it started with AT&T, not Verizon. And AT&T was second in line, and they're about according to the numbering scheme of their orders, there's a maximum of 78 other companies participating in this program. Business records transfer. And I would say that one question that Mike Morrell was a former deputy director of CIA. He was being interviewed by somebody about a couple days ago, and he was trying to support the 215, the Patriot Act section that was justifying this bulk acquisition of telephone records. And the interviewer brought up the Love-In program that was done at NSA, Love Intelligence, and at NSA and CIA. They all have direct access to this data too, FBI, CIA, and NSA. The CIA and FBI use of the data is not monitored by Congress or anybody in the courts. There's no oversight of that at all, and there's no record of anybody trying to see what they're doing. So that's being used primarily to convict people for crimes internally in the U.S. But at any rate, he was addressing that, and he said, well, the Love-In program wasn't done under the 215 section program, and the interviewer didn't say anything beyond that. Well, the 215 program is about business records, metadata, not content. Well, he was saying they were doing it under content, but the guy interviewing didn't say, well, if it wasn't under that program, what program was it under? He never asked that question. The reason he didn't want, because it would get into the lies that they're trying to perpetuate, that they're not collecting content on everybody in the United States, and that's been a lie since 2001. They've been doing that all along. That's why they had to build Bluffdale. That's why now they have a plan for the next 5 years, my estimate of when they'll be built. They have a plan for a 2.8 million square foot facility on Fort Meade. And that is almost 3 times the size of Bluffdale. That's because they're planning on Bluffdale being filled in about 5 years. But the only reason we know about that is because anytime they want to do a building like that, they have to submit an impact statement on the environment. And of course, when you watch those, you can pick up what their intentions are. So their plan is that Bluffdale would be full in about 5 years, and then they'll have this new facility that will now handle the continuation of the collection of bulk data, content as well as metadata. I mean, for metadata, if you had a room this size, it could handle all the metadata on every domain, a very possible relationship that anybody can have for everything in the world for about 50 years. You wouldn't need any more space than that, just in this room. Everything else would, the real reason for all that space for storage is for bulk content collection. Anyway, the idea is that we got to get these lying courts out of the way. These secret courts that make secret decisions on what is and what is not constitutional. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's not a decision that you make in a secret court, in secret, in a democracy. That's because right now we don't have one. So that's why I figure they should be indicted.
All right, I'm going to pass this on down to my right. Hey, go ahead. Absolutely.
I don't have much to add to what Bill just said. I agree with him about indicting him. I'm going to make a recommendation for a book before we go any further, Lords of Secrecy by Scott Horton. And he really goes into this a lot. One of the things he points out is judges don't get to be in that position by accident, or, they're carefully vetted throughout the process from the very beginning when they're chosen to be a federal judge. They're vetted to be sure that they're going to have the right attitudes on these national security issues. Another book I'd recommend is National Security and Double Government by Michael Glennon, who actually worked for the National Security Council for a number of years. And he argues, and I agree with him, that we have the sort of the Madisonian government that we vote for, and that appears to be the one that's representing us. But then we also have the Trumanites, that he calls them, coming out of the post-World War II National Security Act that created the National Security Agency and the CIA, and that they become such an entrenched bureaucracy within our government on national security issues that they fundamentally have taken over foreign policy, development, and all these other issues that go to maintaining security, supposedly, which includes keeping track of all Americans. And they got the judges in place that are pretty much going to go along with them because they've already been carefully vetted. So the problem is so deep right now that there's a lot of work to do, and the first step is to become better informed about it. And I think that's one of the things that are lacking in the American people.
One thing I'd like to add is, as William Binney was saying, a lot of the times when the government wants to get information on us, they go to a handful of large corporations, AT&T, Verizon, your ISPs. One of the things that's allowed the FISA court to become so powerful in what they can obtain from us is all of this data is now centralized. There's a handful of large companies that we all have to do business with. For instance, I would guess that most of you here have cell phones, and you're probably on one of the 4 major carriers. So it's easy for FISA just to say, okay, we want to requisition the records from, say, AT&T, and they've got a large portion of the population. So I think part of the thing we need to do as well is move towards decentralizing the system as much as possible. And that would hopefully help remove some of the power of the FISA courts.
Wonderful. I have a follow-up question to ask you, Bill. Can you name, you said 78 companies that were in the process. Can you name some of those for me?
Let me say, I don't know the specifics of it, but I just made that estimate based on the serialization of the order issued to Verizon in the second quarter of 2013. See, that was order BR 1380. So it was the Business Records 2013 80th order. So that what they're doing is issuing an order to each company independently so that none of the companies know all the other companies participating. So each company gets their own little order. So it started out with AT&T. I'm sure they were the first ones in the pit because they were the first ones participating in October of 2001. Then it got Verizon, should be number 2, next biggest one. That's Fairview Program and Stormbrew Program in the upstream collection process. That's those 2 companies. So I figured order number 1, this was the second quarter of 2013. So order 1 and 2 was AT&T Verizon quarter 1. So order 79 and 80 is AT&T Verizon quarter 2, and the others are made up of the numbers in between are all the other companies, maximum. If you assume that all those orders are issued to companies. So you can't have any more than 78 companies participating at that time. That was 2013. There may be more now, but that also includes things like banks, anybody with credit card things, any of the banking systems or any of the credit unions, things like that, anybody with a large population of data and that NSA wants. Also, some of the internet providers may be in that, in the PRISM program, for example. So it may be part of that too, but it also probably involves other international or multi-country corporations that cross boundaries, go to Europe and Asia and Africa maybe. So if they have ties in the U.S., we have some claim to legal authority to pull data from them. That's part that's bothering the Germans now, because they, and I've been suggesting to them they should indict the companies that are transferring data out of Germany. It's German. The European law says that the data about a person is owned by the person, not by the third party holding the data. So in other words, if a third party wants to transfer it to somebody else, they have to ask permission from the person to do it. That's their law. So by transferring their data, and the B&D has also been doing this, it came out recently. So that means that they're violating their own laws, their government's violating their own laws, passing their data on their citizens to the U.S., to NSA, to incorporate in their database. And the same is true with companies. Well, if they don't want to indict people like the President of the United States or the Director of NSA, then they certainly have the right to indict the companies that are participating in it and also using and getting money from business in Germany. They can certainly do that. I can't tell you exactly who it is, but it's virtually anybody. It would also include people with travel, like airlines, manifests, things like that they want to collect on people traveling. And I'm not sure of all the things they want, but they certainly want any kind of data on anybody so they can build a basic profile of people. And my view is that's to assemble that information so they can have population control, just like they did in the Soviet Union and East Germany. I mean, even now, the Russians are now mimicking what NSA is doing. Their program is called SOAM. I don't know how to pronounce that in Russian, but they're looking at NSA and saying, gee, now we need to do that because they're doing such a better job of monitoring the population. Let us do that too. So we originally learned that technique from the Stasi and the KGB. Now we picked it up and took it in orders of magnitude further, and now they're looking at what we've done and say, gee, we have to keep up with them, so let's go do that. Now the Russians are picking up from us. So it's circulating. Yeah.
All right, I'm here to challenge. So I'm going to ask down the road here from Todd and Chris if you could name 3 of these companies you think are involved with this. And then I'm going to go ahead and ask Bill if he can name 3 companies that are actually involved with this.
Any data company, I guess, that handles data transfers. So, who is that? AT&T, Verizon, Sprint.
There you go. That's
the
right.
whole gamut of them are involved.
If I were going to try and get information on people, I would start with Comcast, as a large ISP. Try and get a couple health insurance companies in there. United, I think, is one of the large ones. And I know for a fact AT&T and Verizon have to be in on it.
Bill?
Okay. Well, I could name the companies in PRISM. For example, that's Google and Yahoo and Skype. That's 3, but there's another part of this. You see, there's the front door acquisition of data that they use for PRISM. That is that when NSA comes in and asks them to give them data, what they didn't know, of course, was that their lines between their major data centers was also unilaterally tapped by NSA secretly. So they didn't even know those taps were occurring. That's because NSA didn't want just little bits of data, they wanted everything they had. So that when they transferred data from their data centers one to the other, NSA got it all. So it included foreigners, U.S. citizens, everybody. You know, so the idea is they're collecting all this data, and the reason I said it was population control because it's all going to be fed into a program called Treasure Map. If you put down NSA Treasure Map as a query in Google, you'll get that and be able to read about it. The objective of Treasure Map is to map the location of every device everywhere in the world, 24 hours a day, every minute of every day, where you are and when you're there. So it's like tracking everybody. Now, I estimate that that's a maximum of 4 billion people because there's only about 4 billion people using phones and emails. There's I would estimate about 3 billion who don't have access to those devices. So that means they're tracking everybody that's in the modern world, and first and second world, mostly a lot of them. So third world countries probably less, but the objective is to do that, and do that they need information as well, because the Treasure Map program gives them the what and or where and when you're there. From the other programs, they get content as well as metadata, so that tells you who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and perhaps even the wham of intentions of capabilities, things like that. So you get the who, what, why, when, where, wham of everything that you're doing in life.
Awesome. That's scary. Here's another question we have. This is, what are the primary differences in your view between the expired Patriot Act surveillance laws and the just passed U.S. Freedom Act, and what, if anything, will change as a result? And we're going to start from the right this time.
Well, my conversations with Bill Binney over the last year or so, he's pointed out that there's so many different authorities that are used for gathering all this information that, and then I know I've heard this from Bill first, but then just the other day, a law professor whom I respect came out with an article pointing out that even with Section 215 being invalid, there's still all the authority under what the government is claiming is actual authority to continue doing everything that they're doing. And going back to an executive order issued in 1981, which is also the basis for the government saying that we have authority to assassinate American citizens. They use that as that part of that argument, and pretty much giving totally dictatorial powers to the president acting as commander-in-chief. And so they don't really need, a lot of this legislation I think is more for a facade to present these programs as legal, when in fact they're doing them regardless of whether or not there's legislation, statutes permitting it. So I think that's one of the first things people need to become recognizing here is so much of this is done regardless of legality or illegality. These agencies have come to believe that they're the only thing standing between us, or at least that's their claim, and perhaps a nuclear weapon going off in the United States. And so they always frame the argument that we have to balance security against rights, constitutional rights. When in fact I say in meaning implying that, and of course security outweighs the Bill of Rights and human rights, civil rights. But in fact, I would say they get that the opposite. The whole point about the Bill of Rights, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, pardon me, but the whole point of the Bill of Rights was to provide the largest expanse of minds being applied to a problem, especially in national security. And so we don't want to have a centralized decision-making authority like the Soviet Union did, Nazi Germany did, coming up with great schemes to maybe invade Russia, until you get to Stalingrad, or maybe to go in Afghanistan like the Soviets did in the 1980s until you get destroyed and have your economy broken down. But instead we want to have a wide variety of people coming to these decisions and judging them more wisely than that. Now we've gone the way of the totalitarian states. We've centralized decision making down to a few people such as the head of the CIA, NSA, and a few others who've really become the central planning committee, you could say, for national security and foreign policy. And that's where the real danger begins. And why do they need all this information? Well, again, like Bill has always said, population control. I'll probably get into this a little bit more, but it's really the techniques that you would use as if they were running a counterinsurgency against the American people in the world. Tracking everybody, and part of counterinsurgency is to human mapping. You gather intelligence by whatever means, so that you can basically draw a map connecting everybody to whoever else they may have connections to, so that you can look and say, well, Bill Binney knows Todd Pierce, and Todd Pierce has said something wrong, therefore there must be, a conspiracy there, or whatever. And that's the danger. We're adopting totalitarian techniques of population control, and that's the real purpose. We haven't seen it go as far as it can go, but who's to say who will be president, say, in another presidential term from now or two? The whole point of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, was to prevent that sort of situation from even developing, and now we've created the conditions where it's almost inevitable.
That pretty much covered everything that I was going to say. One thing I will add is I haven't seen I say it was the caveat, I haven't seen the version of the Freedom Act that was passed, but originally one of the safety measures they claimed to have was that they would have the private companies storing the data and the NSA would have to go through with it, go through them to get it. I don't know if that's still preserved in there. I believe it is. And if it is, the main change,
retroactive immunity and proactive immunity, I think is a moot point.
Yeah, but there is something very important to point out about this, is that one of the major changes would be that the private company could now profit more from collecting and selling your data. A lot of, for instance, Sprint, we know for sure, has what's called a law enforcement portal. If you're in a law enforcement agency, you can actually log into their portal, request information on a customer, and it automatically charges the department that made the request. So if these companies are storing your data, the NSA most likely will have access to a similar portal, and they will just be automatically charged when they come pull information, and therefore these large companies now are incentivized to collect and store your data, and they get a nice piece of the profit.
Thanks. I really don't know I haven't seen it yet, but effectively what that means to me, now if I were sitting in NSA looking at the designs of systems worldwide, I'd say, okay, instead of making one query into a central base, I'm making a distributed query. Okay, I'll do that. That's all that it does, right? It makes it a distributed query. In fact, the systems we set up were based on distributed queries because we had many storage sites around the world. So it didn't make any difference. So effectively, there won't be any change until we do a very simple thing. We insert into some law somewhere, I don't know, House and Senate can start this, that says no intelligence community agency is permitted to have any U.S. data in their database unless they have a warrant conforming to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution that states the name of the individual and the probable cause as to why you're collecting that data. Otherwise, you are required to purge your database of that information. Now, if they did that, it wouldn't matter what source of power they thought they had under Executive Order 12333 or any other order to do it. They would have to purge that database or they're in violation of federal law and they go to jail. And we'd have to put them in jail. You can't just say you're going to do it and not put them in jail. You have to make an example. Otherwise, there's no enforcement behind that law. But that's the way to stop all this crap. I mean, you put a law in that says if you have this data in your base, you're violating the law and you're going to go to jail unless you purge it.
All right, I do have one that came in on my phone from a personal friend that is a congressman. He asked me to stay. He asked me to keep his name quiet, but he wants to know. The NSA will probably know. He texted me. Cool. But it's to explain what the treasure map is. And then I took a couple notes saying what and when, and what are the limits and the timeline on such a thing as the treasure map. I'm going to go from left to right this time. Well, actually, I'm just going to put this towards Bill because he probably knows about it, and then we're going to go over here from there.
My understanding is that Treasure Map is a fairly recent program before 2013, of course, and that they were only capable of doing a few tens of millions of people simultaneously now at that time. So given the rate of progress, you would expect that they should be at several hundred million, maybe a billion by now, and their objective is 4 billion. And it's really a pretty simple thing. It's a matter of indexing data against attributes of devices, which then map to people. And so you can then compile and index all of the GPS from your cell phones or any location from cell towers or positions in the net that you access points. Things like that, you can all index that just to the attributes of the device, which in turn maps to the person. Okay, and if you accumulate that over time, then I can say from this time to this time, map out where this person has been. Right? And in fact, I can look at it and say, okay, this person is in this room at this time. Give me everybody else in this room. So then I draw a little radius of maybe 100, 200 feet and say, give me the location, anybody in this location in this GPS database. Plus, the other aspect of it that I saw anyway was that you can use then the location of everybody, these 4 billion people in the world, to start to make things like face recognition workable. The way you do that is very simply saying, okay, I know you're at this location at this time, here, this and here, this and here, and how many of those locations do we have video at that time? So then if I pull out, say, 3 locations with video, then I would say within, a couple of feet at this point, that's where you are in all these videos. What face is in common in all those videos at that time? Because if you try to use face recognition, like for example, they try to recognize my face in the city of Minneapolis. How many people live in Minneapolis, right? However many that is, 1 million maybe? 3 million?
3 or 4 probably.
Okay, if I try to recognize my face out of 3 million, the algorithm will say there's a certain probability of this match being correct. And so it'll come up with maybe 5 to 10,000 matches potentially, with probabilities ranging fairly closely of matching. Well, if I can reduce that down to a few feet, then the reliability of face matching becomes very positive and very reliable. Then I have your face and I put it in as your ID, and that maps then to you and that device. And so then I can use that as facial recognition anywhere in the world. So that's another benefit from doing that kind of thing. I'm sure that's what they're trying to do. Is it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Perfect. Here's the next question. We're going to go from right to left here. Is Edward Snowden a criminal? Seems very upfront here.
No, he's not a criminal. He should be a hero to the American people. We have a constitution created with checks and balances, and one of those checks is the free press. What's supposed to be a free press, and as we know, pretty much the press has gone along with everything these days, and the only way you're going to hear any real information is find a website that carries something about Bill Binney or 2 other people. So the last line of defense, the constitutional defense, I would say, is whistleblowers, and that's why we passed whistleblower protection laws, and that we don't support or don't enforce. So no, Snowden, and the same with Chelsea Manning, they came across information of illegality by our government, and they revealed it. And here's the thing: so many people, knee-jerk reaction was, well, they told the enemies this and that. For example, in the case of Manning, and then somebody too about the Abu Ghraib prison. Well, guess what? The enemy has all this information already. They've got anecdotal information. They knew what was going on in Abu Ghraib. The only people in the world who didn't was the American people. And the point was, what Abu Ghraib was doing, it was acting as a combat multiplier for the insurgents. It wasn't helping us, it was helping the other side. And that goes to the whole problem with centralizing these decision-making authorities in such a narrow body of people, because typically the military is taught to think very narrowly. The CIA has picked up on that, and they don't have a very expansive way of thinking. So they can only think, well, charge that hill and take it. They don't think of the consequences afterward. What's on the other side of the hill? Is there an ambush? All these other things. What's going to be the effect on the people? And that's exactly what happened to Abu Ghraib. So we by getting that information, we were able to stop those things taking place there, and actually to elevate ourselves a bit, in spite of all the harm. Whereas if we had continued on without getting that information and never fixing those problems, it would have just given more and more of an incitement to the insurgents, costing more and more American lives. So we should be thanking these people for saving American lives and not condemning them like the government likes to do.
Is Edward Snowden a criminal? That's about as much of a trick question as I could hope to hear today, because I can't think of any definition of which he would be considered a criminal except under the United States government's own laws. To look at what he did, we often, bring up the fact that he blew the whistle and showed us what the NSA was doing in spite of the law, but he also did something else. He showed us just how poor the general security of our infrastructure is. So not only did he
have a good story on that.
Yeah, so not only did he tell us what the government was doing, he protected us from foreign enemies. Consider China or Russia. If they wanted to exploit a network here, it was much easier to do before Snowden made his leaks, because we weren't focused on security as much then. So by what he did, he has not only helped promote democracy and freedom by informing us what the government is doing, he's also protected our infrastructure from foreign attack. And as far as I know, from my understanding, that is the NSA's job, they say. So I think he was doing his job.
All right.
I have a couple stories I need to tell you, just because you'll get a kick out of them. But I answered that same question on USA Today on TV. I don't know, early last year. They asked me about what I thought should happen to Edward Snowden. And I said, well, I thought he should be indicted for stealing government property. That's true. But I said also, I believe that the law should be applied equally to everybody. And that it should be executed in chronological sequence of the crime. Therefore, we have to start with indicting George Bush, Dick Cheney, Hayden Tennant, all the members of the FISA court, all the members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee, all the attorney generals since the 2001, and that's the Bush administration, okay? And you do the same people for covering up in the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, and then you go to the Obama administration and try the same people for the same kinds of crimes, then you do Edward Snowden. Okay? I mean, he did steal material, but all these other people have committed treason. They're the ones who are committing treason. They're subverting the entire Constitution of the United States. That's treason. That's against the founding principles of this government. Right. The other story I wanted to tell you, which I thought you'd like, has to do with security and networks. In 1991 and 92, somewhere in there, Dr. John Taggart and I proposed that within NSA we put together a means of monitoring the entire worldwide network of NSA. And everybody on it and what they did as they did. Well, we'd be maybe 50 milliseconds behind, but we would be able to recognize who was doing what, where, and when across the entire worldwide network. And we lasted a month and a half with that suggestion. We ended up with two groups opposing it. One were the analysts. They said, "You mean you're going to watch me? I don't want you watching me. I'll do my job, you do yours." These are the NSA analysts watching everybody else. I thought that was funny. Anyway, then the other group opposing us were the managers of NSA. I mean, they said, "You mean to tell me you could see where I move money from and to?" Yeah. "You mean you could see what programs are succeeding and which ones aren't?" Yeah. "You mean you can tell me return on investment?" Yes. "You mean the Congress can look at that?" Yes. "You're not going to do that." Okay? So that killed it right there. So we lasted a month and a half. But that's because that meant they had no oversight whatsoever of their network and who did what on it. And that's why Snowden could do exactly what he did.
So could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to ask of Bill. Just that, I don't know how many people have really heard Bill's story and the other people that he worked with and how he came to notoriety. Could we just
Point of a gun.
Could you just give us a little background, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, when they started spying on everybody in the United States, that was the biggest crime that I ever encountered in my life, and I was going to oppose that with everything I had. That happened in October of 2001. The second week in October of 2001. Because the programs I've been developing were dealing with mass data, and we had filters up front so that nobody's data got collected unless they were relevant targets, and we knew it was a focused attack on data to pull out data about people who were doing bad things like terrorists and dope smugglers and things like that, people who were targets, known targets, and with probable cause. And or anybody associated with them or in near proximity of a social network with them, or other kinds of rules we were preparing to implement, like if you used a cell phone in Afghanistan or in the mountains of Afghanistan or in Inmarsat or things like that, satellite phones in that area, we are going to look at you because of a high probability you're a terrorist, okay? Or the similar kind of thing is you're in the jungle of Colombia and you're using a satellite phone or cell phone, and we pick you up. We're going to look at you because it's a likelihood that you're either a member of the FARC or a dope dealer. So those were reasons to do, and that I called a professional, disciplined approach, using rules and knowledge about the targets to pull out of the massive amounts of data. And what that did was that made content a manageable problem for the analysts. It was even a problem in the 90s because even when they couldn't do this bulk acquisition, they still had too much data. Their analysts were failing because they couldn't get through that data. And so that was the reason we did that design, that focused professional attack on the network to make content a manageable problem so they can succeed in solving problems and being able to find terrorist threats before they occur, so we can actually stop them and succeed, much like Anonymous did in Texas, okay? And that was, but what we had to do was be able to look into everything flowing through the network. That meant we had to be able to look at fiber optic rates and see everything in it, and be able to look at least the metadata. Because if you had to start to look at the data itself, you were doomed to failure because there was just too much of it. You couldn't get through it. You couldn't keep up with the fiber rates. But if you looked at the metadata, you could see the relationships and look at the relationships and use that as the rule to pull out data, and that's how we did it. But in the end, what they decided to do was saying, I want everything, so I'm I can see everything, so now I can capture it too, because we gave them that capability too. We shouldn't have done that, but we did. And so they turned off that filter up front and took in everything. And then they also got rid of all the protections, because under the rules that we were guiding, we were trying to conform to the Fourth Amendment. If anybody that came in was a U.S. citizen, we would encrypt all their attributes. In other words, if they were talking to a bad guy, we would encrypt their attributes until we could show probable cause. And when we could show probable cause, then we could target them. That's according to the Fourth Amendment and according to the FISA law too. So we were trying to conform to all that. Instead, what they did was remove all those protections, not concealing anybody's identity, and so now they were just violating everything. So that started to happen in the second week of October of 2001. And they had to use the programs we put together to do that, because none of the other programs they had anywhere in NSA actually dealt with massive amounts of data like ours did. So I'm kind of semi-responsible for giving them the capability to do what they're doing today. So that's why I'm fighting for it. I've been since 2001, and when that started to come out, first thing I did was go to the House Intelligence Committee, the people I knew there. They're supposed to do the oversight of NSA and stop. They were formed as a committee, so was the Senate, and the FISA court was formed to prevent the intelligence community from spying on U.S. citizens. That came out of the church committee's investigation. And by the way, one of the main people they were spying on in the church committee during that church committee period was Senator Church. I mean, because NSA and the Minaret program was watching them, so was the FBI and the COINTEL and CIA and Chaos. They were watching him to try to figure out what he was planning to do in his investigation. Well, they're still doing the same thing today, but according to Russ Tice, he's seen the transcripts of people from the FISA court, people from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, people from the Supreme Court, judges, generals, on the anybody 3-star general and above, I think they were watching. So, and all House and Senate members. So they were doing transcripts and still are, much like a Minaret program, or under J. Edgar Hoover, right? We had that kind of activity going on with the FBI. So it's the same thing. I mean, just it's on a grander scale. Instead of doing a few thousand people, we're doing everybody. So that program was one we were inventing then, and when they started using it against everybody, we had to leave, and we went to the different committees. We filed complaints even with the Department of Justice Inspector General, and went through various other members of Congress, and that was over a period of years. And then in 2007, they decided that we'd made too much of a nuisance of ourselves, and we needed to be stepped on. So they sent groups of 12 FBI agents to each of our homes simultaneously. Diane Rourke lived on the West Coast in Oregon, so she got raided at 6 o'clock in the morning. And Kirk Wiebe, I, and Ed Loomis and I live on the East Coast, so we got raided at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's so we were simultaneously. Nobody could call each other. See, I'm getting raided. You can't alert your friends. Okay, so. That's the way they did that. So they came busting into my house with guns drawn. So they were pointing guns at my son, pushed him out of the way, and then came upstairs to where my wife was getting dressed. They pointed guns at her, and they came into the bathroom where I was getting out of the shower and pointed a gun at me. So, of course, I didn't understand why they were doing it, but because I'd been cooperating with them for about 3 months, they were asking me all kinds of questions. I was telling them everything I knew about who was involved in Thin Thread, because they were looking at the New York Times. The principal was looking at the New York Times expose of the warrantless wiretapping program in 16 December of 2005, I believe that was. That was Jim Risen, whom I know now too, and Eric Lichtblau, whom I also know. So they did their Pulitzer Prize-winning article, I think it was. So. And they used that as a basis to raid us. But it was really the DODIG complaint that they were doing retribution against us. They also were afraid that we would go to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where Attorney General Gonzalez had just testified and not told the whole truth about the spying programs. They were afraid we were going to do that, because we go to them and tell them, because we had a record, kind of a consistent record of going to committees and congressional people and telling them the truth, and they didn't want that out. So they wanted to threaten us with the FBI and guns and stuff like that. Well, it did me anyway. And I guess the point was that I started getting mad at them when they were there. Okay, because I knew why they were there. I mean, it wasn't too hard to figure out. These people were transparent. Okay, the only one who was cleared for all these programs was the special agent in charge. Paul Marek was his name, and he was the only one who was cleared for the Stellar Wind program. Which I called. I did my test when I first started meeting you. I enjoy this. They called me in to talk to me about this people who knew about this program, and I said, oh, this was my test of them. Were they cleared or not for this program? It was a test that I had to have. I had to know that they were cleared. They said they were, but that didn't mean anything. Okay. So when they said, do you know anybody who knows about this program and all that stuff, and then I said, oh, you mean Cosmic Fart? And I waited for the reaction, right? It took about 3 seconds or 4 seconds for this FBI agent to react. Well, then I knew he was cleared, okay, because the Stellar Wind program I referred to as Cosmic Fart. But he understood that. So that was my test of him, okay. So, but I mean, I had been cooperating for 3 months with them before this started, and then after the raid, when they were there, I said, so you guys were sent here by somebody outside the FBI. And by the physical reaction of all the agents, except of course the guy in charge, I could tell that I hit it right on the head. Because it's like you watch people and see their reactions. It's like you caught the kids with their hand in a cookie jar, right? That's the kind of reaction you got from them. So I knew I hit it right on the head. And then they started telling me things like, questioning me, saying, tell me something that will implicate someone in a crime. Okay, so that means I'm supposed to determine what the crime was, right?
You shouldn't be here, is what you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I got back at them. Okay, let me finish this stuff. So after they said that, I said, well, I didn't really know anybody that or anything that would implicate anybody in a crime. They said, I think you're lying. Well, that was the wrong thing to say to me. Okay. When they said that, okay, I know what the crime is. George Bush, Dick Cheney, Hayden Tenet went through this conspiracy to subvert the entire Constitution. Here's how they did it. And went to the Stellar Wind program and what it did, what information they were taking in from what companies, and how they operated and manipulated and displayed it. And all the other agents in this that were sitting around there listening weren't cleared for this program. Okay, so they weren't cleared. I knew this. See, I'm causing him a problem. All this guy could do who was cleared is look at the floor while I was doing this. Okay, that's the only thing he could do. I'm reporting a crime to him. Okay, they're under obligation to research and investigate that crime. But they were here to cover it up. That was the point that they were doing. So that's how I was telling the other agents what was happening and why they were there. Well, you know, of course, the head agent can't let them disperse. I mean, if they go away and start talking about that, hey, you know what I heard today, you know, you can't have them doing that. So he had to have a huddle outside with the cars. They couldn't go. He had to pull them all together and say, now you guys can't talk about anything you just heard. I know what he said. That's what he had to say. And then he said, you have to come see me tomorrow morning because you have to get cleared for a program. Once you're cleared for the program, you can't talk about it. So I informed them of what the program was, and they weren't cleared, so now they have to be cleared. So now they can't talk about it. So that was the problem I created for them. And from there, after that, after the raid, they, over the period of a couple of years, through 2009, about 2.5 to almost 3 years, they 3 times attempted to indict us, all of us, the ones who were raided, on false charges. Well, each time I was catching them with I had exculpatory data, and each time they thought they had it, right? But we had friends and we shared things, so they have it too. So that when they took it and left with it, we asked for it back, and we got it back from our friends. So that's the best thing about sharing. You can never, it's like backup, or it's a backup system for your data. So then they did that, and then the final time was in 2009, late 2009. They tried to indict us on a conspiracy charge. They said we met at the Turk Valley Club. Now what we were doing there was trying to formulate or put together a group of a corporation to attack Medicare, Medicaid fraud. You know, they actually give 30% finder's fee on anything you save the government, and since they have a 60 billion loss every year, we thought we could make up to 20 billion a year. Save the government money and save us money, right? So, you know, the potential was there. Anyway, and we had good ideas on how to do that. Not the stuff that they were doing, duplicate billing. Now, we were actually going to pick out fraud. So, when they said that, they were going to charge, our lawyer told us they were going to charge us on that and indict us and get the conspiracy charge on us, why we started wondering how can they do that? I mean, they've got all this data about us. They knew what we were doing there. This is a false charge, of course. They were trumping up and fabricating evidence to put us in jail. That's what they did to Tom Drake. That's what they did to us. So, but I had the data because I got it back from the friends. We had other people there who weren't involved in NSA at all. We were going to draw them into this program too, and of course we shared everything with them. So that when the NSA or what the FBI took all the data away from us, thinking we didn't have any of the exculpatory data, we called them up, say, hey, give us back the data, will you? And then we got it back. So then that was all the evidence of malicious prosecution. Okay, so I said, how can I get this information across to the DOJ lawyers that I'm going to charge them with this when we go to court under their indictment? Well, I thought for a minute, I said, okay, Tom Drake's phone is tapped, I know, by the FBI. So I'm going to call Tom. I'm going to read across to him all the evidence I've accumulated on malicious prosecution of the DOJ lawyers. And so I did that, and I said, Tom, at the end of it, I said, Tom, tell your lawyer that we intend to indict them for malicious prosecution when they take us to court with this charge of conspiracy. And I said, and then I just hung up. Well, then a month later, January, I think the 12th it was of 2010, we got letters of immunity from the DOJ. So that went away rather quickly, and our lawyer never knew what happened because I never told him what I did. Okay. Because I said, why should I tell my lawyer? He doesn't know anything anyway. So anyhow, that was how he got rid of it, and from then on in 2011, I just thought, well, gee, with all this, that was really the final thing for me. I mean, here's my own government, Department of Justice, trying to fabricate and frame us as a group. I also tried to frame Tom Drake. I mean, they took papers from his home that were marked clearly unclassified, drew a line through it. It's obvious they did it. I mean, it's on the court record, and they stamped it secret or top secret, and then charged him with having classified data. Well, that's a felony. That's fabricating evidence to convict people. That's a felony. Why aren't these people in jail? When Dick Cheney said we're going to go to the dark side, he really meant it, and we really did. Okay, so that's my story. Now I just can't stop and let this continue without saying what I had to say about it. I mean, this is just terrible. I mean, we're losing our government here.
Thank you.
All right, to keep this nice and brief, I'm going to quote Kim Kardashian after her wedding vows and saying, let's make this short and sweet. We're going to move on to the next question. I'm going to ask from right to left in 2 sentences. 2, how can we push for corporations to not be considered to be people?
Well, I can't really answer that in 2 sentences, and hadn't given much thought. So I mean, it always comes from the bottom up. You know, they're not going to. It serves too many corporations' interests the way it is now. It's determined by the Supreme Court. It's only going to change when people really get genuinely involved and not just think that these problems are coming from President Obama because he's a Democrat or President Bush because he's a Republican, but begin realizing that the system of government, not the system of government, but the way it's being enacted these days is the problem, and we need to correct it, and it's only going to be done with the exercise of democracy to the utmost, and get serious about it, and gather information, and realize that how many people benefit off this. I'm gone beyond my 2 cents. But one final thing, and nobody's mentioned the military-industrial complex. The Washington Post once in a while does a informative article. Most of the time it just covers up this stuff, but they had an article a couple years ago about the immense amount of resources in the DC area, dedicated contractors to intelligence, you know, analyzing whatever, and it's an incredible amount. In 2008, when I was out in DC and everything was going, you know, falling apart here in Minnesota, the economy, the one island of prosperity in the entire country was Arlington, Virginia, and pretty much Arlington is the center of everything. It's the center of all these contractors, and nobody there was suffering whatsoever. It's prosperous, and it's good times. And that's what people need to realize is they're sucking the money out of our pockets and out of Middle America and, you know, Middle America, including Virginia and every place but Arlington, Virginia, and a couple of other places right around the DC area. And it's not because of the Health and Human Services Department, but it's because of the military, the Department of Defense, the intelligence agencies, and they're the ones who are taking the money and our prosperity away from us and the prosperity of our children to fund their own lavish lifestyle.
I'll try to keep this in 2 sentences. So, do the corporations control the government, or does the government control the corporations?
Yes.
They feed off of one another. Their power base is based off of one another, and the only way I foresee getting rid of treating corporations as a people is you have to get rid of both.
2 sentences, right?
Yeah, you got it, buddy.
Okay, 2 sentences. Todd is right. I agree with him.
I'm going to turn this over to Heather, who I know very little about except that she ran for office, it has brown hair, and it long legs. So let's go to her, bring her up here, and we're going to go to the next portion of this. Yeah, go ahead and give her a round of applause. She's a great girl. She's very smart. She ran for U.S. Senate, if I remember right. She had just a bang-up job, too.
We tried to get Colleen, but
Yeah.
that's one of the letters.
Oh,
This
okay.
was the story.
Okay.
Thank you. As he said, I'm Heather, and I have the audience questions. And I was trying to organize them in order because I think a lot of them are actually related. I think people wanted some clarification on a number of programs. Considering PRISM, Stellar Wind, Trailblazer, Thin Thread, the FISA Amendments Act of 2008, CGAD, DARPA, the Teletech Holdings, Executive Order 12333. I really feel a lot of these are related. Can you elaborate on that? And how?
Sure. Okay. DARPA is the defense department that deals with advanced research, and they hand out contracts to contractors and the universities and so on to try to do technology developments. Usually it's over the horizon and you never see it. Which means it's money that's spent on advanced research that never produces anything. That was my view of them when I was there, and said, why don't you do something that I can see? Bring something over the horizon back into view, will ya? So they kept working over the horizon. It was something like you could do, indefinitely, and say, well, I'm thinking ahead. You're always thinking ahead, and you never really produce anything. So that was the way I viewed them, anyway.
Sure.
Well, they spend a lot of money, $3 billion a year back in the 90s. So, but the other programs, PRISM, that's all these. A lot of these programs are data acquisition programs. That is just functionally, it's data acquisition. They give different names to different companies or to different operations. Like, if we're going to query the companies, it's PRISM. Okay, if we're going to tap directly up the fiber lines for data, taking it in real time as opposed to after the fact asking for it, then it's multiple programs. We'll call the overall group of them upstream, and each one will be, each company will have a different name. Like there are exceptions there, like Fairview is AT&T, Stormbrew is Verizon. Oakstar is actually foreign companies, okay, that deal directly with NSA. Okay, and some of them, the only one I knew was the Polish one, and then they subnamed that one. It's called Orange Crush. So there's all these names, but it's really data acquisition. They're doing this to confuse them, everybody in Congress that wants to look into the programs. Because the more names you have, the harder it is to understand what they're doing. That's exactly why they do that. Okay, so what are some of the other ones there?
In conjunction with that, when did some of these programs start? Because my understanding is some of this started before 2001 and before the Patriot Act.
There's some implication that I need to get out here. Joe Naccio is a guy who used to be the CEO of Quest. I met with him and talked to him a bit because I knew he was probably framed like they tried to do to us, and he didn't catch them, so he went to jail for about 5 years. Okay, so but that got rid of him. But they approached him in 27th of February. It's in court records. 27th of February of 2001, about 7 months before 9/11. And it was somebody from NSA, and they asked him to produce all the records of his customers, every U.S. customer as well that he had, and give all that data to NSA. So that was the plan even before 9/11, okay, was to take in data. He refused, okay, he said, produce a warrant signed by a judge and I'll give it to you. And they never did. But what they did was they went after him criminally, got him convicted, and that was the example they used every other CEO. Okay, that's how you threaten all of them. You put one of them in jail. Well, that's how we should handle our elected officials. Right? That's how we should do it. They've obviously been committing these crimes. We need to put them in jail. I blame what's happening now on Jerry Ford. Why? He pardoned Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon he was indicted and he was going to go to court for the crimes, the Minaret, COINTEL, all those programs, the programs that are exactly similar today, except they're on a much larger scale. If you read the indictments against Richard Nixon, they're the same things that are happening today. But we haven't indicted anybody. We haven't impeached anybody. We should have impeached them all and indicted them. So, this is how the government dealing with people. This is a totalitarian state you're talking about here. This is like the Gestapo or the SS or Stasi. This is not democracy. Some of the other ones?
Somebody wanted to elaborate on the privacy compacts of the TPP, TTLP, and the TLSA, so-called trade agreements.
I really don't think I'm competent to answer that one. I can't really, maybe
Okay.
somebody else can?
Touch very briefly on some of it, but not much.
Okay.
So the main thing a lot of these trade agreements are covering that I've seen has been intellectual property law, namely trying to get copyrights, held in this country to be enforced in foreign countries. And honestly, if you look at the entire, how they're being negotiated, they're keeping the entire agreements in secret. They won't actually release what the agreements say for public scrutiny. And that right there should be a big red flag to everybody.
Okay, I wanted to add one more thing. The main program I didn't address was Stellar Wind. Now, Stellar Wind is not an acquisition. If you take all these different named acquisition systems and for different companies and different, whether you have wiretaps or you're looking at satellite access or something like that, it's different names. And if you take that as acquisition of data, then when you pull it into your database, you partition the domestic to one side. Now, all that domestic data, then an analysis of it and the collection of it and storage of it is called Stellar Wind. It's dealing with the domestic side of collection. And domestic, anything that pertains to domestic analysis of domestic data or collection or acquisition or any use of that. Okay, so and the others are named in different programs. Like when they talk about, we don't want to. When they were talking about the 215 program, it was the secret interpretation of 215 program. That when they say that, they talked about it as one program. Well, it's not. It's like 14 different programs. Okay. The one program, the Stellar Wind part of it that contributed to Stellar Wind, was the one that was domestic. And that's easy to tell. If you're looking at phone numbers, anything starting with a 1 is generally either the United States or Canada. That's pretty simple, okay? And I should tell you another story. When Senator Wyden asked the director of NSA, how many U.S. citizens do you have in your databases? It was kind of hard to avoid that, okay? So they went away, said, I can't answer it today. Okay, so they went away and then they sent him in writing. And in writing, they told him, we can't tell you that because it would be a violation of the privacy rights of U.S. citizens. This is in writing, okay? I call this the arrogance of power, and the intelligence agencies think they own the government, okay? That's saying you go away. Well, what they should have done is cut their budget by 30% right there.
I know him personally, by the way.
Let me just
Not
add
wittingly.
something. Just going to the point that you made about secrecy. Here we have an international trade agreement, and it's secret. Here we're supposed to be in a democracy, and we have just a couple people making the decision whether or not they're going to do it. People's livelihoods are at stake. So same problem as everywhere else we're seeing in national security. It's all secret. We don't know what's going on. Here's somebody who used to work for the CIA sent an email around to 2 people the other day asking, has anybody ever heard of the NSAC? And everybody said no. And there's just a couple things out online. Did a quick search, and it's something that's really within the Department of Justice and the FBI, but it's totally secret. Nobody knows what it is, including some journalists who are really on top of these things. And but they've got a huge budget, and they've got the authority to track U.S. citizens, not just foreign citizens. So it's really our own internal Stasi now. We have, let's stop kidding ourselves, we have the infrastructure of a totalitarian state. Whether or not they've set up concentration camps yet, that's beside the point. The infrastructure has been created. And one final point, a recent law review article coming from George Mason University, where old NSA directors go to teach and live off the retirement and carry other influence, came up with the proposal the other day that it's time to start putting into military detention fifth columnists, like law professors who have disagreed with the government. We're at that point. We're at that point right now. Just the who's going to be president here in the next term and how far they're willing to go. Dick Cheney, if he was there, we know how far he would have gone. He would have set up concentration camps way back in 2002 for U.S. citizens, not foreign-born terrorists.
Sorry, can I add something to that?
Sure. You can have another
Thanks.
question.
I had something to add to what Todd was saying, and I was in Chicago when I was on the radio. I can't remember which radio it was. I've been on so many since I came up this way. And I was asked about this plane flying around. What was my best guess of that? I said, well, to me, it looked like it was part of this operation. And what they're doing is having a sensor up there that's sensing all the cell phones that are in any location where they aren't getting geopositioning on them. So that now they have this massive amount of data on all the cell phones active in the city and where they were at the time. And then that's going to feed into things like Treasure Map. Okay, and that's done by the FBI. I mean, we've only talked about NSA programs, but the FBI and CIA have similar kinds of programs, and they do this kind of data acquisition too. And none of that's been talked about because they do it without oversight.
You spoke about oversight and elaborated on some of these programs. What I want to know, and I'm sure a lot of people here would like to know, can you elaborate more on how some of these committees, the FISA court was actually established without actually any type of election? I think a lot of laws are passed, but then the implementation and policies and procedures surrounding them are left up in the air. So can you elaborate on that and how the people can actually counter that? Anybody on
Okay,
panel?
well, let me take that one on. Actually, the Intelligence Committees, House and Senate, and the FISA Court were a result of the Church Committee investigation in the mid-70s, and also the FISA law in 1978. And those were created because of what they found out about what NSA was doing with the Minaret program, spying on U.S. citizens without a warrant, and what the FBI was doing in COINTELPRO, following people and doing the similar things against people, actually trying to get people like Martin Luther King to commit suicide and things like that. And the CIA had their similar program called Chaos, doing the same thing against the same set of people, enemies of the White House, basically. People opposing the war, Vietnam War. And I'm sure they were all included, anybody in any way connected with opposing that war and trying to expose some of the lies and parts that got us into it, got all our people killed. And
All of Sheila Wellstar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we lost so many people who got maimed and killed over there, and we killed so many people and maimed so many. It's all based on a lie, just like Iraq, based on a lie. So, I mean, we were talking about it earlier. Even CIA people knew that when they said that Cheney was saying there was a meeting between Atta and some other people in Iraq, that was a lie. People knew that was a lie. And they didn't tell anybody, so they let the lies continue and they let them build up the lies to justify the war. And that's the same thing happened in Vietnam. So, I mean, we haven't had, and by the way, the same thing's happening here with the war on terror, supposed war on terror. There's no war. Congress never declared war. I mean, Congress is the only body that can declare war. The president can't. And so, but they're calling it a war, and they always try to justify it as a war. That's how you justified his statements in secret writing, right? In secret, saying that this, under Article 2 powers of war, the president can do all this stuff. Well, there's no war. Where's the war? There's no declaration of war. So he has no power under that. That's why later on he tried to get Congress to agree and give retroactive immunity to all the telecoms and things like that for all the crimes they were committing. Okay? And also they should have tried, they didn't give retroactive immunity to all the government employees who were committing these crimes too. They didn't do that. But I wanted to add one thing about Edward Snowden. None of the whistleblower laws apply to him because he's a contractor. Whistleblower laws only apply to government employees. So I just wanted to add.
Sure. Did anyone else have a comment on committees or how this works?
So, for quite some time now, our government has been working under the premise of the phrase, it's better to ask forgiveness than for permission. And it's taken it to an absolutely absurd level. Every time the government gets caught doing something nasty, the reaction is a new committee, an oversight committee is created. And then that oversight committee either doesn't do any oversight or it itself gets caught doing something nasty, leading to another oversight committee. The only solution I see to this problem is through term limits. Now, I'm not thinking limiting the number of terms somebody has, but mandating 2 terms. And with apologies to anybody who's in office in here, you have to understand these are drastic times. But I believe that all elected officials in the federal level should have a mandatory 2 terms. 1 in office, 1 in prison.
I had a better idea.
Chris just made an excellent point. I wanted to say, and we learned this with the torture report. We saw how the CIA was actually infiltrated into the committees, and this is not a secret from what I understand. A number of people have told me this, that they are infiltrated into various government agencies in D.C. that might have any effect, possibility of touching the CIA, so they want to know what's going on. And so we have a broken down oversight system to begin with. What's the solution? What they always sell this on, and is the fact that we're at war. And going to Bill Binney's point that we're not legally at war, but yet they can sell that to people so easily, and people that supposedly are skeptical of government, yet they'll just fall in line, click their heels together. As soon as you say, we're at war, there's some Arabs over there that are threatening to kill us, and we got to do this or that, and here's another country we need to go in and depose and have regime change. And probably almost 50% of the people are ready to immediately, again, click their heels and fall in line. And that's one of the things we've got to break down. This is what American citizens can do. These war claims are bogus. Al-Qaeda never consists of more than a couple of hundred people who were involved in Afghanistan, fighting amongst each other, and any talk of a caliphate only meant that back in 1920, the caliphate was taken apart, which only meant that it was the Turkish caliphate that had existed for hundreds of years and never threatened the West, and was something that we easily lived along with, and no different than the Vatican. But it's been exaggerated into by Islamophobes into this threatened, second coming of the Nazis. So you got to begin looking and listening with skepticism to these fanatics, because that's the only way you can describe them, who are trying to tell us that, the Muslims are coming and we got to all get to the shore and with our guns because, they're going to invade any minute. It's a bunch of BS. And we need to, until we get away from this permanent, and here's a term they're using now, persistent war. The state of persistent war, meaning, this one might end, but there's going to be another one right around the corner, so let's just get used to it. I mean, I've actually seen articles saying that. We got to break that system down, because that's what allows the military-industrial complex all of its immense profits. They pay for think tanks in D.C. to keep promoting wars, and that's the first place to start. Until we get out of this war paradigm, we're not going to break the stranglehold that the military-industrial complex has on us. So that's a place to begin.
I wanted to add about the FISA court. The FISA court is appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It doesn't go through any Senate review, as far as I know. And they should, right? There should be a process there for validating that position. They do that for other federal judges. Why not the FISA court? They are selected from federal judges who are in different courts. They call them, every time they talk about them, they talk about judges, Article 3 judges. But what they're sitting on is a court that's an Article 2 court. It's not an Article 3 court. There's no, Article 3 courts require opposing positions and arguments going back and forth, and the judge adjudicates with using the law and the Constitution between the arguments. That's an Article 3 court. The Article 2 court is on the 6th floor of the Department of Justice, and here's the government side and no other side. And there's no argument. All they have to do, they can't. Even Judge Reggie Walton said when he left the court after Snowden's exposure of the general warrant, came out and said, well, we don't have any real way of really following and verifying what the NSA or any of the intelligence community agencies tell us. And it's exactly right. He has zero capability to do that. That's why I was advocating that hackers should be hired to represent the Congress and the courts, Article 3 courts, not this makeshift Article 2 court, and be authorized and cleared to go into any government agency anywhere and look at every database they've got and everything they've got in that database and verify every process that any of them are using and look at what all the analysts have as tools to work with on their desks and see how they're operating and what all data they're looking at so that it can verify what's really going on. There's no verification process now. Trust but verify, the only thing they can do is trust. The other thing I wanted to say was I had my own suggestion as to how to fix this problem. The shortest version was 3 regiments of samurai one night. Okay? The other version said, let's have an Article 5 states constitutional convention, and where we change the entire rules for electing people to go to Washington, and we randomly pick from the phone book every 2 months. We won't do any worse, okay? We can't do any worse, right? Plus you get a bunch of people who are honest, most of them anyway, so that's certainly different. And then you get a bunch of people who want to balance a budget because they have to at home, right? So they'll have an idea how to balance it. We don't have that now, right? And then you'll get a bunch of people who want to work together to solve a problem, most of them. So you'll get a Congress and a Senate and a White House that will really want to do something for the people. And then no lobbyists can lobby them because they're not going to be there next time. 2 years later, they're gone. The new group's in. That's true. That's true. Civil service, right? That's exactly what it was intended to be. Public service by the citizens of the country.
was a couple more questions, just totally, possibly different. What do you think about Jim Comey, Robert Mueller, and the 2004 resignation from the FBI? And that's to any panelists.
I know about that one. I know about that one.
You do?
Yeah. This is referring to the hospital visit to Ashcroft Ladies in the hospital. That was done because of the Stellar Wind program. And that's because they were collecting not just metadata, but content, and they were afraid that the aspect of email content was going to be a basis for indicting Ashcroft as the first sitting or standing, however you want to look at it. At that time, he was laying down in the hospital, Attorney General to be indicted. So that's what that was all about. I believe that they all should still be indicted for what they've done. Because it didn't change the fact that they were violating the Fourth Amendment or the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments in secret. And Mueller said that in his interview with Bart Gellman in March of 2011 when he thought he was going to be out of the FBI directorship. And when he talked to him, Bart, he said, "We've been using the program Stellar Wind since 2001." So it tells you he's been looking into all the personal email and phone calls of everybody in the United States. And had access to the rest of the world too. So that was that one.
And then we have a question about the Dodd-Frank Act. It requires banks to collect, storage, and transmit data to the Federal Reserve. Does the Federal Reserve share data with the NSA?
Yeah. In fact, the banks do. They're part of the 78.
People wanted that clarified. I just had another question about, we have a lot of people asking questions, but I don't think a lot of people know how to even get involved. Where does that start? How did you was in the government, you worked within the government, how did you get involved? How do other people get involved?
Well, I can well, I got involved directly when they started to try to indict me. That was pretty straightforward. So it was clear for me I had to fight this. I mean, when they did that was war. Okay, as far as I was concerned, that was war. They were declaring war on me with no foundation whatsoever. So I thought I should reciprocate. So I'm out here telling you, I'm exposing their underwear and making sure they know that everybody knows what they're really doing in spite of what they're saying, because they use a lot of sophistic techniques to confuse and to delude people into thinking something other than what they're really doing. It's like don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain from the Wizard of Oz, right? So that's really what they're doing. They're doing this all behind the curtain in secret. So I'm getting involved directly with the people in Congress, talking to staffers as well as members of Congress. I was supposed to have a meeting with Rand Paul a few months ago, but we couldn't get our schedules worked out. So hopefully we'll do it again sometime. And in the meantime, I've been talking to people like Judge Napolitano and trying to educate the judge in terms of what this really means technically, so that the NSA and CIA and all these people can't come down there and bamboozle them and trick them into thinking they're really doing something right when they're really setting them up, So, and he's in turn talking to other judges like his friend Judge Scalia. So I'm trying to get knowledge into the judicial so that they can, in fact, recognize when they're being bamboozled. They can't do that now. I mean, NSA goes before the FISA court judge and says, this happened, this happened, this happened. How can he challenge that? He can't do that. They can't challenge any basic information that NSA throws at them. And yet they know they've had a long-term problem, because even back in August of 2002, the FISA court, I don't know how they did it, but they found out that they were misled by the FBI, lied to by the FBI, to get at least 75 warrants. Well, they've been doing that all along. That's not new. So here's this court that's basically worthless, and they should be forced to go into an Article 3 court where they have to argue out in the open, where they can be contested by somebody else, not sit behind in a secret vault doing stuff, which is what they're doing with that court. So I think we should abolish it or indict everybody in those courts. I think they're a real shame. They brought shame upon the judicial process of the United States.
Thank you.
question is how to get involved.
Yeah.
So just quickly on myself, nothing exceptional about myself. I wasn't even, to my credit, I was not a lawyer until my 40s. Before that, I'd been on active duty for a while as an Army reservist, as a computer technician, worked in construction before that, went to law school in my 40s and got commissioned as a JAG attorney. I ended up retiring as a regular Army officer, but becoming a JAG attorney, just about the time the Kosovo War was starting, I started reading antiwar.com, and that'd be one of the things I'd suggest, like Bill just said, you need to inform people, and to have informed people, you have to have information. Antiwar.com was one of the best sites I found way back then, and still continues today, bringing very good news on what is actually taking place. Consortium News is another one. I get published on them once in a while, on both of them. The Ron Paul Institute. I'm not a libertarian, been a Republican, been a Democrat. I've shed all that partisanship because that's not the problem. The problem is the partisanship, because it covers up the fact that the government is out of control. It's not the parties. So we need to realize that it's the government, not the parties, that we need to be pointing fingers at. So anyway, when 9/11 come along, I was on active duty as a JAG attorney out of Fort Snelling, and it was really apparent that no, we were going to go way overboard on this, and so anyway, I just kept tracking things. We picked up all the people, and immediately it was apparent that the Bush administration, and I might have even called myself Republican yet, or at least leaned that way at that time. After the Bush administration, never again. But it was clear that they had an entirely different agenda. We started getting hints of the legal opinions being written, and the whole idea of the unitary executive theory, which is plain, just another word for dictatorship. Make no mistake about it. It's dictatorship. We have Republican Federalist Society, which I once belonged to, lawyers who have proposed that we need to be reading the works of Carl Schmitt, the Nazi legal jurist, for this state of emergency that we're in. In other words, we need to adopt the practices of the fascists for today, which I hope is readily apparent is totally fallacious and sinister. So I saw what was coming out of the Bush administration. They picked up all these people in Afghanistan. Rumsfeld saying they're the worst of the worst. They had almost 900 people at one time, and having been paying attention to what goes on, low intensity conflict for a number of years, I knew better than what they were saying about this. So anyway, I hung on as a JAG attorney, and when the chance came, I volunteered to go and be a defense attorney in the military commissions. And there I really had my eyes opened on both the incompetence of the CIA, who really runs Guantanamo, the incompetence of the military, the covering up of their own incompetence, and on and on and on. But in the course of that, I had to do a lot of research on what the United States is now going back to claiming is our domestic common law war. And that's a civil war case between the one time during our history, the entire northern states, not the South, but the northern states were under martial law. And anybody saying even something embarrassing about the Army was put under military arrest and put in front of military commissions. Or somebody shouting out that Lincoln's an incompetent would get you in front of a military commission. That's how bad it was. The Supreme Court got rid of that precedent immediately after the Civil War, and nobody brought it up again until Dick Cheney and John Yoo and David Addington decided, hey, this worked good. It worked once during the Civil War. We can impose this system of repression on the United States again, using this as precedent. And that's still what the United States is arguing in Guantanamo. This is our domestic common law war. Well, you got to put all these things together in a mosaic to really see where it's going. So then at the same time, we have the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act providing that people who are suspected of terrorism will be put in military detention pending disposition under the law of war. So you ask, which law of war? Well, it's our domestic common law of war. So right back in the Civil War, repression that is liable to be pulled up anytime, just depending upon how much they think they can get by with. And immediately then, you have people, dissidents, who are being put into military detention on the grounds that they're suspected of aiding the terrorists, not even being terrorists, and we're in a system of police state. And that's all been created now, and it's just a matter of when is the other shoe going to drop.
So the question is, what can you do? When you're going up against a giant monster like the NSA and state surveillance, the thing you have to keep in mind, the thing you have to keep in mind is that the reason these programs are so effective is because we've made it so cheap to actually implement them. What I mean by this is we're all carrying around cell phones. Those cell phones are connected to a handful of large carriers. Those cell phones also don't do anything to protect our communications. Our text messages, our phone calls, they all go to clear text that AT&T, Verizon, Sprint can see, intercept, and give to the NSA. What you need to do if you want to try and stop or slow down the system is you need to raise the cost of doing it. And that comes from all of you having to start using secure tools for communications. Now, I won't get into a whole lot of detail here. I will say that I am with a group called Crypto Party MN. We are going to be having an event on part of B-Side Security Conference, June 13th and 14th at the Target Common Plaza. If you would like to learn about secure communication tools that raise the cost of doing state surveillance like this, feel free to show up. It's free of cost, and we will take all the time you need to teach you how to use some of these tools.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thanks.
Website?
Just go to bsidesmsp.org. That'll have the event information.
I wanted to add something to what one of the subjects that Todd brought up there. That was the NDA, National Defense Authorization Act. The section he was addressing there was Section 1021, that authorized the president to declare somebody a terrorist threat, to have the military take them off the street and incarcerate them indefinitely with no due process. That is Special Order 48. It says almost exactly the same. Special Order 48 was issued by the Nazis in 1933 after the Reichstag fire, and that's how they got rid of all of their opponents, the communists and everybody else, off to the Gulag or off to the concentration camps. Right? That's exact. It says exactly the same thing. All you have to do is Google it and read it on the web.
Thank you very much. I am going to turn this over to Tony Stiles again.
Maybe.
He has some additional comments to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, I hope we've had a good time here, and that's, by that I mean informative and great. And in my experience of being in radio, I usually come up with a good anecdote at this point, but I'm not going to because I'm not on radio. So I'm just going to hand it over to my friend Nick over here. And give him a good round of applause. This guy has done a great job. We're pretty much everything we've ever done. Microphone doesn't stretch that far, Nick.
I don't need that.
All right, go for
I
it.
can handle it. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right, perfect. Thank you very much, panel. Thank you, Mr. Binney, for showing up. I think this has been great. Has it been fun?
Yeah.
Thanks to Tony. Thanks especially to Heather for putting all the questions together. Let's give Heather a hand. And for yourself a hand for showing up and coming up with wonderful questions and participating. I always like to give the last word, but I can't because David Arvidsson is going to come in and he's going to get the last word.
This is
Jay,
it.
before you give the last word, can I say one last thing I wanted to add?
How long is it going to take?
1 minute. What can you do? I was very disappointed when I went to a Tea Party meeting when I came back from D.C. 2 years ago, and one of the first things said was some young woman got up and said, turn off the TV and take your kids out to movies. Go take them and see Zero Dark 30, which was the documentary, you could say, of the CIA torturing human beings. So the one thing you can do is right off the bat is begin calling your Congress members, anybody else who's in power, and demand accountability for the recognized war crimes committed by the CIA and anyone else involved in the torture, and put aside any biases you might have that, well, they're terrorists, they deserved it, because that's totally false. And to realize that we have CIA people who we have evidence now have committed war crimes, and if there isn't accountability for that, there'll never be any other kind of accountability. So that's a place to begin right now, demand accountability for the war crimes committed by our U.S. government.
All right. David Arvidsson.
Oh, gee,
Wait, not yet.
I just had one thing to add to what Todd was talking about there. In the case against John Kiriakou, and if you don't know John, he was ex-CIA. He exposed one of the names of the torturer. The CIA went after him, and he spent 32 months in jail. So he was going to expose the torture, and that they gave retroactive immunity to all the people who did the torture. What kind of country is that?
All right, very good. Now, are we ready?
We're ready.
If not for David, we wouldn't be here tonight. Thank you, David.
I don't know if that's true or not. I just wanted to say, if you are not currently in some sort of a liberty group, I would encourage all of you to join one. There are plenty around. Liberty-leaning groups are a wonderful place to explore ideas, concepts, and brainstorm outcomes. Some groups, like those led by my friend Nick, have been around and doing just that for many years. Some others are relatively new. Doesn't matter. A group can help in getting you comfortable thinking a concept all the way through. Then you can share your thoughts with friends, families, whomever you are comfortable with. It is how liberty will grow. Liberty people want you to make your own decisions. We all fail, we all succeed, but as a group we can stand more firmly for that ingrained human need, want, and desire we all have to be masters of one's own self. After all, who cares more about the decisions that you make than you do? Liberty ideas won't always win, and the arguments we present won't always be popular, but when we lose as a group, we can seek to be compensated more thoroughly. Liberty people have been called everything from potheads and isolationists to anarchists and fools. I call Liberty people my friends. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening.